Hello, my name is Andre Ward, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Policy at the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy of the Fortune Society. Welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal legal system from various perspectives, including people most impacted by the criminal legal system. We do this by asking critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and we highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone affected. We ask you, the viewers, to join both sides of the bars and to spread the word. And you can share your comments with us on Twitter at The Fortune SOC. Today's show is entitled Criminal Justice Pioneer Retires After 34 Years. A tireless advocate for the countless individuals, families, and communities impacted by the criminal legal system, JoAnne Page, the president and CEO of New York City-based The Fortune Society, will retire from those posts at year-end. JoAnne Page led The Fortune Society for 34 years, growing the nonprofit from a staff of 20 and a budget of $700,000 to a staff of over 500 and an annual budget of more than $6 million. With that growth, she transformed the organization into one of the that not only provides advocacy and direct services, but also housing to set people on a path toward meaningful transformation. Last year, Fortune served more than 11,000 individuals with life-changing services, and in this episode, JoAnne Page will discuss how Fortune's innovative initiatives in New York City have become models for similar programs throughout the country. People need hope, she explains. They need to see a bright future. No one should be defined by the worst thing that they have ever done. And so we're joined now by JoAnne Page. And JoAnne, thank you so much for joining us on this special edition of Both Sides of the Bars. How are you feeling today?
I am feeling really good, Andre, because as I look back over my 34 years as CEO of the Fortune Society and more than 50 years of doing criminal legal system work, I think that I have been blessed with an enormous opportunity to make a dent in a savage system and to build programs and services that give people a chance at a new, better life after incarceration.
Absolutely, JoAnne. And I want to make sure I do you justice, JoAnne, by just reading your bio, right? Because people need to understand like the work and history and breadth of like who JoAnne Page is, right? And so JoAnne has been president and CEO of the Fortune Society for 34 years. And after graduation from Yale Law School, she practiced as a criminal defense lawyer with the Legal Aid Society, and then went to this court employment project, which is now called Cases, and developed its felony alternative to incarceration program before joining Fortune in 1989. And under her leadership, again, Fortune grew from over 22 employees to now 500 employees, right? Focusing on alternatives to incarceration, model housing for homeless, justice, and impacted people, from emergency through permanent supportive housing. So I wanted to make sure I read that bio for our viewers, JoAnne, because it's important for that context. And so I guess I'll start, JoAnne, by saying, what brought you to this work? 34 years plus, JoAnne, 50 years of doing it. Like what brought you to this work?
Well, my personal history is that I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, and that most of my family was murdered in Europe by the Nazis. And my dad survived Dachau. My mom was a hidden child. And I think that I have a mission to intervene in savage systems, just as a handful of people did. And that's why my parents survived. I started doing volunteer work in prison at about 18. And I found the work that I wanted to do in the rest of my life. And I've learned so much from the people that I've worked with, and from the staff, and from the whole set of struggles that we've had politically to try to reverse mass incarceration. But also, I've learned a lot about what it takes to build programs that speak to people's needs and that have legs, that will survive long term because they meet ongoing needs. So, I graduated from Yale Law School in 1980, and my classmates went on to be Supreme Court justices, to work in white shoe firms, to make a lot of money. And I believe that I got the best deal. I got to do work that meets my passion for social justice, that always has been a learning experience where I was in water over my head, and where I get to see transformation of people when they see hope and when they have access to needed services. So that mix of advocacy and services fits me like a glove. And I'm looking forward to retiring after 34 years as CEO of Fortune, but I'm not going to be retiring for this work. I'm just going to do it less full time. And I will be working with Fortune and with our new CEO, Stanley Richards, to continue providing housing. And we have 3 housing projects in the pipeline. I'm looking forward to the next year and work with our team to bring them home.
Absolutely, JoAnne. And you've been doing this work again, like as you said, over 34 years, at least 50 years or so, and you've seen a lot. You've done a lot. You've learned a lot, as you've shared. And what have you observed, right, in your years of leadership in the reentry criminal legal system reform advocacy space, both locally and nationally?
I see it go forward and back like the tides. And I fear that we're in a receding justice moment where mass incarceration is being considered as an alternative without realization that it's a failure and horribly destructive, and that it doesn't work to stop crime, and that it absolutely rips the guts out of the most vulnerable communities and people. I believe that there is a growing constituency that is fighting mass incarceration. I have faith in the future in being better than the past, but I think there's a room for advocacy right now because bail reform is being rolled back and mass incarceration is being reconsidered. I think also part of my reason for optimism is I am so stunned and inspired by the resilience of individual people coming through the criminal legal system, coming through immense trauma, maybe multi-generational trauma for most, but being amazed at how people grab onto hope and build good lives for themselves, even when given a slim fighting chance to do so. So the work that we do with our participants just continues to inspire me because it's just a powerful statement on what people are capable for and how people can transform themselves into people who are a resource to the communities, to their families, and build better lives.
Mm-hmm. And, thinking about that, JoAnne, there's still a tremendous amount of work to do, right? You mentioned, obviously, that although you won't be in the capacity of CEO, you'll still be supporting the housing work that Fortune advances. And because there's so much work still left to be done to address the inherent challenges within the criminal legal system, outside of the housing work that I know you're truly passionate about and have been like an architect of the current housing models that we have at Fortune, what other role do you see yourself playing in the future, like with this work around criminal legal system reform?
I want to share the knowledge I've built. There's a whole new generation of leaders coming up in the nonprofit field. I know a lot about running a solid organization and a thriving organization and building solid programs in the face of real government dysfunction in terms of paying the organizations on time and enough to cover expenses. But I think that it's an ongoing struggle to put a face on the consequences of criminal legal system politics and policies. And I really see myself as being an advocate on these issues while I still have breath in my body. But you're right. My special love is housing. And in my 34 years, in Fortune's 55 years, we've done housing for the last 20 years. And I think nothing has the transformative power to change lives and multi-generational patterns of trauma than having a safe, supportive place to live with affordable rent. And we now house about 800 people on any single night. And we're cruising toward 3 more buildings. So I see housing as a pivot, as a foundation for building a good life. But I also see advocacy against housing discrimination, because we see widespread discrimination against people with records in accessing affordable housing. And that is a precious and scarce resource. And people with criminal legal system history should be judged individually in terms of whether they would be good tenants. And they should not have the door shut to them because of prior criminal legal history.
Mhm. And now, JoAnne, you talk about this housing work, right? Obviously, you have been poised to ensure that housing comes online for people with conviction records over 20 years in building out the housing work. And it's been done locally, right? What do you think are some of the things that it takes for people to kind of replicate some of the housing models that you have created here in New York City? What do you think it will take nationally? What are some of those pieces? And I know obviously it's a lot, right? But in like a few minutes, JoAnne, how can you share with people nationally? Because I understand that you'll also be supporting with technical assistance work in some ways nationally, right? Quite possibly. And what might you offer people that are looking to build out housing nationally as some of the things that you need to do?
So we have been asked, Fortune has been asked by New York State to replicate our Castle and Castle Gardens model of emergency, transitional, and permanent housing in an upstate jurisdiction that didn't have any such housing. And we collaborated with the Center for Community Alternatives and the Syracuse Housing Authority to create what we call Freedom Commons, which is a complex, mixed, affordable, and supportive housing, permanent housing, and emergency housing, which just opened at the start of the pandemic and is going really strong. And we've also collaborated in technical assistance for organizations in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that wanted to create reentry housing. So I think that what it takes is a service provider with experience with the criminal legal system and the population and their needs. And what we were told by the first consultant on our first project, if you have site control, you can raise the money to build. And so what we did, and this was at the very start, was we looked at what we could afford in a mortgage for site control and what we could sit on for as long as it took. And we put money down on a shell of a building, got a conventional mortgage, and then just started fundraising. So I think that there needs to be a strong will, because there are a lot of obstacles. But I think the first step is to get site control of a site which is zoned as of right for housing, because if you don't have zoning as of right, community opposition based on bias against people with records is going to pretty much kill any chance that you get your zoning changes. And then I think you just need to write proposals for the capital side of it, with an eye to knowing that you need to support the services on an ongoing basis. I think getting advice from skilled consultants is necessary when you've not done it before. But I also think that there are experienced housing providers that have not tackled the housing needs of homeless people with criminal legal history. And I encourage people such as those to also look at projects, perhaps in collaboration with a nonprofit that offers services. I think that we need a stubborn commitment, and then site control, and then fundraising.
And then there's another piece to it, JoAnne, that obviously we've learned from you throughout the years, right? And Fortune has put out this toolkit, and it's called the NIMBY toolkit.
Exactly.
And so what's also, I think, talk to us a little bit, JoAnne, about the importance of engaging, piercing that veil of community opposition, right, to building out a project at a site. And some of the things that you kind of did is as briefly as you can, because obviously you're able to provide a full length of obviously information around that outside of this interview for those who are interested. But talk a little bit about that, because I know that was some challenge to some degree too.
It always has been a challenge, but except for the project that we are now engaged in the Bronx, it's been an overcomable challenge. And right now we're dealing with virulent opposition that I think is fueled, at least in part, by racism and by fear. But that's something we faced in every community we've moved into. And what we've done is put massive energy into building trust. Because if people have been burnt by nonprofit providers that have brought a vulnerable set of people into a vulnerable community and then vanished when they were problems, we learned that we needed to build trust first. And when we built our first project, and this was in West Harlem, there were pickets, there were protests. What we've been doing, and this is for 20 years, is we have been going to 6 meetings in the community every month. Because what we said to the community is, we are going to be here. If you have questions, if you have problems, just turn your chair around to the community board meeting and talk to our representative, because we're going to make those problems go away. And we've kept our word. And we are now a trusted member of the West Harlem community, where we had fervent opposition. We now do produce giveaways. We have meeting places in our house. We are a polling place. And we are firmly embedded as an organization that makes the community better. So I think there is no excuse for missing the step-by-step trust building that will win acceptance of your building and your tenants in the community. And as you said, we put a toolkit out to just share our lessons learned. And the toolkit is available at our website, fortunesociety.org. And we welcome calls and requests for technical assistance. But NIMBY it actually was a really moving situation for me, because the people who opposed us most strongly were the people invested in the communities. And when they knew that we were to be trusted and that we were going to be doing affordable housing so that their children could live in the gentrifying neighborhood that they had held solid through the crack pandemic, they became our strongest supporters.
Yeah. And JoAnne, just thinking about your work, right, over the 34 years that you've been doing this, and how many lives you've touched and many people that you've inspired and caused to be in action, right, with making a contribution in the world that's meaningful and significant. right? Now that you're transitioning from this phase of your life, because there are other phases that are probably going to be beautiful and powerful and all that kind of stuff too. But what wisdom, JoAnne, can you offer those who are leading work, right, in the reentry criminal legal system reform space? Because it's not an easy space to navigate, and you've done it yet over 34 years, going over 50 years. You've been doing this work.
I think that as I've done this work, it's all become more simple for me. What I know is that people are made of the same stuff, that people have the same hopes and the same dreams. And what we want in the criminal legal system is what we would want for our own loved ones if they were in trouble. If you think of that standard, if you think of your mother or your son or your daughter in trouble, how would you want them treated? And you would cringe at the thought of their being in the trauma factories that are our jails and prisons. We have models for humanely run correctional institutions, primarily in the Scandinavian countries, but we lock up too damn many people. Incarceration should be limited to containing people who are not safe in the community until they can get their feet under them and be released safely. And very, very few people in our jails and prisons need to be there, because there is irretrievable damage to severing people's ties to the community, severing people's ability to work, ability to maintain housing. And one should only do that kind of damage when it's not necessary, when it's necessary, but we should not have savage institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And JoAnne, you talk about those things. I know another part of the work that's connected to the housing work is the litigative work that Fortune does as well. Can you talk just briefly about that, why it's important to hold bad actors accountable, and why fundamentally it's not solely about the money in the cases of lawsuits that are leveled and the wins that comes from holding bad actors accountable? Talk a little bit about that, JoAnne, that kind of side of the work at Fortune.
I'm smiling because this work brings a smile to my lips. We have a truly wonderful relationship with a civil rights attorney firm in Washington. And what you want to encourage is people to do good for the sake of doing good. But you basically want enlightened self-interest, because if bad actors are doing damage, holding them legally accountable and having a walloping big financial judgment is a powerful disincentive to discriminate. So you want the laws in the books that prevent discrimination, but you need to have enforcement by government agencies, but also by actors like the Fortune Society, which will find discriminating landlords and take them to court. And hopefully, we've had 2 major judgments that we've won. And what we want to make sure that landlords, brokers, and so forth know is that if you don't do the right thing, you're going to pay. And that's a motivating factor that we need. In addition to the right laws, the right enforcement, and production of housing that's available to people, you want to show that deterrence is needed, and that if people are bad actors, there are going to be consequences. And I'm really proud of the 2 major judgments, $1 million in one case and $500,000 in the other case. And we don't get rich off this. Mostly this goes to pay the law firm fees. But those dollar amounts are powerful deterrents against discrimination.
Sure. And JoAnne, unfortunately, we're coming to a close on the show, unfortunately, but certainly not a close on engaging you, right? And so any closing thoughts, JoAnne, before we end this show? Not your show, but this show, because you got a few more shows left to go, JoAnne.
Oh, I have hopefully a couple more chapters.
Yeah.
But, I think what I've learned at Fortune is the importance of synergy between, people like me who came out of family history and law school and people who have life experience in the criminal legal system. And because of that experience, have a passion and knowledge for both the policy and program work. And I think that because Fortune is a mixed community with people drawn from a whole variety of places with a whole variety of life experiences and expertise, but united in passion, I think that is a winning formula for having a strong organization, strong advocacy, and strong programs.
JoAnne Page, President and CEO of the Fortune Society, thank you so much for joining us here today at Both Sides of the Bars. And I thank you, the viewers, for joining us today here at Both Sides of the Bars. And in the meantime, on behalf of the Fortune Society, we'd like to thank you so much for tuning into Both Sides of the Bars. And if you're interested in finding out more about Both Sides of the Bars, we ask you to join us and by going on our website at www.fortunesociety.org. That's www.fortunesociety.org. My name is Andre Ward, and as always, we appreciate you for joining us as we critically look here at the Fortune Society at Both Sides of the Bars. Be well.